What if Jesus moved into Adam Oliver? Or the Shack City up the hill, right here by the city in our parking lot? Or into the White House? Or the tents that are out in the woods behind our church out there? I read an article this week that said once people get used to certain comforts, that taking them away can seem like torture to them. And it was to deal with our environmental kind of global warming. That we all have to, are we willing to give up our comforts to help stop climate change, was the article. We've been studying the Apostles' Creed. And last week we looked at Jesus, right? The Son of God, our Lord. And as we examined, we noticed the Bible portrays Jesus as the Son of God, not a Son of God, and as Lord. And the proof, really, was Jesus being raised from the dead. He was fully God, come to earth. He was our Creator, Paul states. The Lord of our lives that we are all accountable to. He's the hope of the future that we also have when we live, because He has the power over death itself. If someone were to ask me why I believe in eternal life in heaven, I would say as a Christian, I follow Jesus and He defeated death for me. That's how I can say I have that power. The danger, though, of some of our beliefs, they're very true, aren't they? Is that we as Christians then can think that Jesus doesn't quite understand what it's like for humanity and our frailty and our weakness. C.S. Lewis shares a story of a boy who was asked what he thought God was like. The boy replied, "God was the sort of person who is always snooping around to see if anyone is enjoying himself and then trying to stop it." How many of us view God this way? We fear what we will have to give up in following Jesus. Our money, He's going to want my money. That pleasure that we secretly enjoy and we kind of keep it hidden. Or our lifestyles. Over what we will gain from following Jesus. Do many of us feel like we got to follow Jesus simply over the fact that He is our get-out-of-hell-free card? And do we not know Jesus as our best friend? What qualifies Jesus to speak into our lives? What qualifies us trusting anyone to speak into our lives? Right now, this is a really important time for our country as we're going through this election process. And we're seeking a leader, right? That'll lead our government and our country for the next couple of years. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's much discussion going on to who is qualified, right, to lead. Who can we trust to lead our country? And there's many going around trying to say, you can't trust this person. Oh, he's an American citizen and a Canadian citizen. So he's divided in his interests. Well, I'm an American and Canadian, so oops. He flies 2 planes around the country, so how dare he lecture us on environmental responsibility, right? That's what we hear. What qualifies someone for you to trust them to lead you? Is it not that someone that we feel can relate to us? That we feel that this person has our best interests in all of their decisions over us? How do I know that I can trust Jesus? Because yes, Jesus is fully God, who holds the world together in His hands. But Jesus is also fully human and understands all that we go through in life. Yes, Jesus was never has never wronged anyone or misrepresented God by any of his actions or attitudes. As I was preparing for this message, I had one of those, okay, God, I'm not hearing what you're trying to get me to say. So I decided to take a drive. And I called it prayer driving. Okay? I recommend it, but just pray with your eyes open. Okay? Or if you want to do something better for your health and the environment, then take a walk. Pray while you walk. But I first drove up the hill here, and out behind the Salvation Army, saw our little shack city next door to the church. I asked myself, would I give up my comfortable house to live like that? Homeless? No, I wouldn't do that. Next, I saw a man cutting grass, and I asked, would I want to cut grass for a living? Now, part of me loves that. Part of me loves working with my hands. But there was another part of me, as I sat and typed out this message, I knew I didn't really desire to do that for a living. That wouldn't be me. But I continued to drive around town passing grocery stores, thinking of how I was getting hungry for lunch, even though I never really have known real hunger in my life. Drove past the curling club and baseball field, which was supposed to be finished this past summer and wasn't. Then I made my way down Clark Street, turned into new housing developments, and I knew that I'd never be able to afford one of those new houses. And then I thought, well, with 4 kids, all those new houses were only built with 3 bedrooms anyways. So my family wouldn't fit in any of those houses. And those small yards, people. How could you ever have a garden, a good, decent vegetable garden? So I kept driving. Came around to the north side of town. Ran into the 2 major streets that we have that are undergoing construction. And they're still not open yet. Oh, I was reminded how the Salvation Army has really struggled now since they moved here because of the construction of Charles Street and the lack of business by the people that have been staying away from the construction. All around town, I believe God was helping me see that there's people at such various places in life, and many of whom I could never even relate to their situations. But what about Jesus? Jesus in Matthew 8 said, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Jesus did the job that nobody else wanted to do when he washed his disciples' feet. Jesus, of course, was born into a humble stable to poor parents. Jesus lived as a refugee in Egypt while Herod sought out to kill his family and him. The late preacher Charles Spurgeon helps us realize that the infinite came down to earth in the form of an infant. He who spans the heavens and holds the oceans in the hollow of his hand condescended to hang upon a woman's breast. The King eternal became a little child. Jesus understood hunger. Jesus was full of joy in the Bible. Jesus cooked breakfast for his disciples. Jesus had to get away by himself, even to replenish himself. Jesus sighed at times. Jesus wept. The shortest verse of the Bible. If you want to say you memorized the verse of the Bible, at least you could say, I know one. Jesus wept. Jesus took children, in his arms. Jesus got angry over injustice. Jesus understood betrayal. And Jesus was even overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And he urged his friends to stay with him and pray. Paul, in the letter to the Philippian church, urges them in chapter 2 that Jesus never used being God to his own advantage, he says. Our text this morning reminds us that Jesus is the one who is able to sympathize with our weaknesses. He was tempted in every way just as we are, yet was without sin. So the text says Jesus acts in his ability to relate to us as a fully human person as our high priest. The Jewish high priest was to act as an intermediary between the people and God. The highest privilege of a high priest was once a year going into the Holy of Holies in the temple to appear for just a few moments before God on behalf of the people. Our text helps us see that, yes, Jesus as the Son of God is in heaven with God the Father, but Jesus is also fully human and is able to sympathize with our weaknesses, understanding the temptations we face in life. It says, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, did he take it easy? No. He offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. As Jesus walked in our steps, he never used the power of God to his own advantage. Our high priest, although he was the Son of God, demonstrated God's compassion for us by suffering, taking the world's suffering cries into his own cries, shedding the human tears himself, taking the hardships and weaknesses we face upon himself. Jesus is our source of being fully human, who qualifies us by trusting in him to bring eternal salvation to us with God. I'm just going to close with a story called The Long Silence. At the end of time, billions of people were scattered on a great plain before God's throne. Most shrank back from the brilliant light before them, but some groups near the front talked heatedly, not with cringing shame, but with belligerence. Can God judge us? What does he know about suffering? Snapped a pert young brunette. She ripped open a sleeve to reveal a tattoo number from a Nazi concentration camp. We endured terror, beatings, torture, death. And another group, a Negro boy, lowered his collar. What about this, he demanded, showing an ugly rope burn, lynched for no crime but being black. In another crowd, a pregnant schoolgirl with sullen eyes. Why should I suffer, she muttered. It wasn't my fault. Far across the plain were thousands and hundreds of groups. Each had a complaint against God for the evil and suffering he permitted in his world. How lucky God was to live in heaven, where all was sweetness and light, where there was no weeping or fear, no hunger, no hatred. What did God know all that man had been forced to endure in this world? For God leads a pretty sheltered life, they said. So each of the groups sent forth their leader, chosen because they had suffered the most. A Jew, a Negro, a person from Hiroshima, a horribly deformed arthritic, a disabled child. In the center of the plain, they consulted with each other. At last, they were ready to present their case. It was rather clever. Before God could be qualified to be their judge, he must endure what they had endured. Their decision was that God should be sentenced to live on earth as a man. Let him be born a Jew. Let the legitimacy of his birth be doubted. Give him a work so difficult that even his family will think he's out of his mind when he tries to do it. Let him be betrayed by his closest friends. Let him face false charges, be tried by a prejudiced jury, and convicted by a cowardly judge. Let him be tortured. And at the last, let him see what it means to be terribly alone. Then let him die. Let him die so that there can be no doubt that he died. Let there be a great host of witnesses to verify it. As each leader announced his portion of the sentence, loud murmurs of approval went up from the throng of people assembled. And when the last had finished pronouncing sentence, there was a long silence. No one uttered another word. No one moved. For suddenly, all knew that God had already served his sentence. Jesus is the best friend a person can ever have. I invite praise team to come up as we do our prayer